If you just lay down your paint and it looks pretty good, but you like to sand it and buff it, let's find out how to do that. I often get questions sent in on my website, how do you actually do buffing and sanding? There are several books out there that show to sand straight this way and then back and forth and do basically a hex pattern. Whatever idiot wrote that apparently has never sanded and buffed, or they're retarded or something. You don't color sand paint that way. You always do in circular motions. If you're not really sure you believe me or not, or think I'm wrong, go look at how they do plexiglass, which I'm talking about clear plexiglass that they use to replace glass with, is that it's plastic glass. When they actually, after forming that stuff out, in order to get it to clear, see-through finish, they circular sand with fine paper until they get it all buffed out and cleared, or where it's buffed out so much it's see-through. And that's because you do it in circular motions. You don't do it straight up and down. So in this video we're going to look at how I color sand and then how I buff. I use 3M products for the buffing compounds. It's actually pretty simple. It's number 1, 2, and 3. I'll put the product link down in the description, and I'll give you some alternatives too if you don't want to try to, because it's not exactly cheap. But I'll put down in the description also the buffing pads I use, because I use a woolly buffer and I use sponge pads. And there's multiple types of sponge pads. There's flat ones, there's wafered ones, there's some that you can center up, and some that you just kind of guess where they go on the Velcro onto the little pad. Not everybody uses woolly buffers, the woolly pads, but I do. Even when I sand up to 5,000 grit, I'll still use them. The point of using 3,000 to 5,000 or even 7,000 grit sandpaper is the idea of being able to sand it out and just polish it so much with paper that a sponge will pull out the sanding scratches from that and make it beautiful, and it does. And I will use the finer papers if I'm doing a mirror that's off the car, or even on the car. But if I'm doing a mirror, if I'm doing a gas tank on a motorcycle or a side cover, and I can't exactly hold it real well, I can, if I do up to 7,000 grit, I can hand polish it, or I can use a little sponge buffing pad on a drill or something like that, because you get a big old buffer on top of a little part and it grabs hold of it, it's going to shoot it across the room. Plus I'll show you in this video how when you're buffing, you sweep over the edges and not against them to catch them. So let's dive into the video and see how this is done. Now what I want to show you is, it's cloudy today. Actually, it's probably going to rain. That's why I don't care if I'm wet sanding. If it gets rain, and it's not going to hurt. But you can see that you cannot see the reflection that well. I mean, I don't know if I'm going to catch it, but if you raise up, you can actually start catching that orange peel. And it's really, really bad. And it got that way because the hood was painted when it was sitting in the sun excessively hot. And it was vertical, which I recommend never to shoot a hood vertical. And that's in another video, so look down in the description for the link for that video. And that was where I was sanding out a run. I got a video on how to remove excessively bad runs, so watch that video, and that would be down in the description too. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start off with 800 grit color sandpaper with a little sponge. Now you can use a solid squeegee block, and what that'll do is it'll try to start cutting the surface flat as it can get. If you really want a slick finish, you'd want to use a solid block. This hood isn't that important because the whole vehicle is going to get a paint job. So we're just wanting to make it look like a little shinier than what it is. It's probably going to have this orange peel still in the end, but I did want to show how to color sand. So in this, normally I start off, when I do my paint jobs, I usually start off like 1500 because they come out really slick, if I even have to start with that. But this one has got dirt in it because it was shot outside, and it's real orange peely. So, and as bad as it is, I'm going to start off with just to hit it real quick with some 800, and then go to 1000, then 1500. But so you'll see me do my steps, and then I'll show you how to buff. In case you noticed, I've got the hood released. And the reason why I do that is that way I can sand up the edges and not have to worry about sanding on top of the fenders. It gives me a little flexibility, and if I need to, I can put a block under and raise up so when I get back there to those to the corners. So it's already been washed, but we're going to go ahead and I usually wet down my area that I'm going to sand. Kind of do it in sections to give myself a little bit of a kind of work it in the grid fashion. Your water needs to have liquid detergent in it. The reason being is it lubes the soap and makes it glide across. If you use just straight water, it'll have a tendency to start grabbing. So you just keep your hand flat. You don't try to bear on any one spot. Even if you find a spot, you don't sit there and bear down with your sandpaper on that one spot. It can mess it up pretty bad. Actually, I'm just going to go up to that squirt hole. That just kind of gives me a... You also don't want to do this in the sunlight. Especially on a black vehicle. You don't want to be trying to wet sand with the sun barreling down on black paint or dark color, because it will dry this out. So you want to do it in a shaded area or inside of a garage. Or put you up a canopy or something. And I can feel how rough this paint is. And do it in circular motions. I have seen books sit there and go tell you to do this and then go back and forth. That is insane, stupid, and crazy. Sand in circular motions. I think the books, some of the books tell you to sand in cross grid so that when you run a buffer over it, it cuts the cross grid down faster. That's stupid, it's insane, there's no point in that. Whoever wrote that, I've had to repair 2 paint jobs because of that. I had 2 street rod customers that one of them had a 55 Chevy and one of them had a 36 Chrysler. And they went by the book and sanded it in cross grid, and they couldn't never get the gloss to come out when they were trying to buff it. They even ran high-speed buffers on it enough to rip the paint off of it. I just went back over it with 12,000 or 12 grit and just did my regular up to about, well, at that time, 2,000 grit. And color sanded it, and it come out perfect. No hard buffing, no hard sanding. You just want to try doing swirls and stay even everywhere, even patterns. This I see a piece of dirt right here showing up, and I could go get my... Well, I could get the sand. I could do this. If you run across a piece of dirt and you just designed to get rid of it, you can use your little squeegee block. Either draw it back a grit or try the grit you're sanding with. Because this sponge is going to ride over top of that piece of dirt. I mean, it'll smooth it out, but it's just going to kind of ride and still keep leaving it. A hard surface like the squeegee block will actually level it out. And if you're curious if you got much of it gone, you just squeegee it and check it. And I see it's coming down, but not fast. And as orange peely as this hood's going to be, it probably isn't really going to matter. Now's a good time to take a break and just kind of to see what I have done. Just and this kind of gives you an idea how bad the orange peel is. Now this is coming out pretty good. Although I could already tell in the light, this is a finer, rougher orange peel, and those are the hardest ones to deal with. You almost have to take them down a glass slick to get rid of it. But like I said, the goal on this one is not to get it all glass slick and perfect. It's just going to take it down enough to get a shine on it, and make it look like something. That's good, you know. But you'll probably do each section about 2 or 3 times, unless you've got a really bad situation like this one. So this means I'm going to have to work this area more. And if you're worried about sanding the edge of the other panel, run you some tape down it. I've been doing this for years, so I'm kind of comfortable with my hand with a sanding block or a sanding sponge. And when you're wet sanding like this and you hear a scratch or a squeak or feel something rough, stop immediately, because you see these lines, it'll actually cut into the paint with lines like that, because it means it's got a piece of dirt. That's when you got to squeegee it and wipe it down and start over. So I just work sections at a time. I'm down to the 2000 grit now. So it's looking pretty shiny, just at an angle. Won't take much to rough it out. So what I did is 800, 1000, 15, and I'm just going over some 2000 to just kind of help make it buff easier. Like I said, this is not a show job or any perfect job. The whole vehicle needs to be painted, but I hate having buff and swirls or anything. I sand and buff. And the hood's feeling really slick now when I'm rubbing it. It doesn't feel rough at all. It's still, even though all this sandings are going on, since I didn't use a solid block on the paint, it's still going to have that orange peel in it, but real faint. And the squeegee, not only does it help you see what you've been doing as far as sanding, it also helps get off any of the debris that you've been sanding. Now you can see where it has ridden on the top, and you can feel it still feels a little lumpy, but smoother. This still feels as rough as it did, just about. And you see how fine it is. Now I can buff that, and it should come out okay, but it's still not going to be perfect. But it'll have a better sheen than the rest of it. So this is also to your specifics. If you want it to come out glass slick, then you need to sand it to where there is no shiny dots. You need to sand it where it's all smooth, all one uniform color, flat. If you're just trying to spruce it up a little bit, then you can probably stop when you get it like here, and then go on and cover the rest of the panel you're sanding, and then come back with the next grit. Like this started off with 800, which is not normal. Normally you start with 1000 to 1500. But whatever you start with, then go the next level up. And usually on a vehicle like this, I'll stop at 2000 grit. I'm not going to go any further. They make it all the way up to 7000 grit. Let me explain the grits. They make color sanding start off with, actually back in the old days, color sanding was 400 grit. But basically, for everybody knows, when you're rubbing a car out, and that's what this is we're rubbing it out, rubbing the paint down. But you rub, you can rub starting with 600, 800, 1000, 1200, 15, 2000. They do make a 2500, it's harder to find, 3000, 5000, 7000. Now, the papers are depending on you, how much work you want to put in it and what you want to do. This obviously is an everyday driver, and it's going to get a whole paint job, so there's no need in me making it a show job. But I did want to show how to color sand and buff for people that are not really sure how to do it. But if it's a real rough surface like this one, probably should start off with 600, and I may jump on it with 600. I'm not sure yet, because sometimes you have to try your areas to see how fast it's cutting. I'll probably just stick with the 800 because I don't feel like getting in and having to remove the 600 grit scratches. So I'll start off with 800, then I'll hit it with 1000, and then I'll probably hit it with 15, and then I'll run it to 2000 just real briefly. I use a woolly hair buffer, and we'll get into that here in a little bit, but I'll use a woolly buffer with a rougher compound. However, if you want to do a show job, regardless of what you start off with sandpaper, your end job would be anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 grit, and the purpose of that is is you can use your rougher compound but on a sponge, and that way you don't get the cuts from a woolly hair buffer, supposedly. I have, every job I've ever done, I've used a woolly hair buffer. Even when I've gone, you know, up, well, I think at most I've ever sanded one's 5,000 grit. Now if I've got a small motorcycle engine, you know, small motorcycle gas tank or small parts or something, I'll take it up to 5,000 or 7,000 grit, and that way I can just use my sponge buffers or even rub it out by hand, because it's not always easy trying to hold a motorcycle tank or a small mirror for a car and try to buff it. But for an overall job on the car, I have taken them 5,000 grit, and I used the woolly hair buffer really light, real quick, and then went to sponge buffing, and it came out like $1 million. But you can do just the same thing here. I could stop at 2,000 grit, and it's going to come out real deep looking. It's going to come out really glossy, and I'll do my sponge buffing after the woolly hair buffer, and when I'm done, you won't see any buffing swirls or anything like that in it, because it really, I use the 3M system. It's 1, 2, 3. I'll put the numbers and stuff down there. Though that method, that system is the best I've used. It takes out the initial buffing swirls. Then it has a compound, takes out those buffing swirls, and then it has the end product is perfected with a wafered sponge. Keeping it cool, and you go low speed and you rub it around, and it removes anything that you've put in there with buffing swirls from any of the other stages. But in this case here, we're going to go 800, 1,000, 15, 2,000, and then I'll show you how to buff. Now after all the sanding and washing it off and it's dry, you can see that with 2,000, of course I rubbed a towel over it, it's got some streaks in it, but you can see that it's got a shine to it. And this is a woolly hair buffer. And normally whenever I do a job, I buy a brand new one for every job. But sometimes I keep some that are somewhat still in decent shape for what I call crap jobs or quick jobs or something that's not that important. Whereas, like I said, this vehicle is going to be getting a paint job anyway, so it's not really going to 100% matter. But you need to pay attention when you squeeze the trigger. You need to pay attention to the rotation. So looking at it as you would be buffing, it's turning clockwise. The reason why we want to look at that is because whenever you're buffing and you come up to an edge, you want the top of that buffer to be swooping over the edge. You don't want to be trying to catch it to catch the edge. It'll run the same with this, like this little hump in the hood. You want it to be kicking up and over it on all the edges. The reason being, you always want it to keep going that way when you're buffing. In other words, to your edge. The reason why you're doing that is so that you don't burn the edge. If that buffer runs the other direction and catches the edge, it's going to eat the edge off. I don't care even how much paint you have on it, you got to be very careful. So the whole time I'm buffing, you're going to see me always keeping the buffer to the edges, you know, swooping over the edge, not against the edge. Also, another thing with a woolly buffer, if you get a woolly pad, get you a dresser, and that's what this is. And I'll show you here how you use it, but basically what this does is it keeps the compound out. Another thing is, I've seen people do it, don't be squeezing the compound all over the vehicle and then go into buffing. And don't be squeezing a goop load, a half a bottle on the thing. You want it to kind of keep, the whole reason of buffing is to kind of keep it a little bit dry. I mean, you want compound on it, but you also want it to be dry. So what I always do is I just put dabs around, smear it a little, push it on the car and smear it a little bit, and then pull the trigger just real easy. Now this is not a variable speed buffer, but I'm used to using it. I do have a variable speed. I would recommend getting a variable speed, and I'll put the link down in the description for one. Now this is a woolly buffer dressing wheel, And what it means by dressing is that these little spikes up here, they run through the hairs of the buffer and pull out any kind of packed up buffing compound or any debris or anything that causes scratches. And you want to use it every time. You say if you put some compound in your buffing pad and you buff a little bit, then you stop, then you use this again and clean it up. And it's what they call dressing. You dress it every time in between compounds. Don't keep putting compound on your pad. Keep trying to buff and buff and buff, because it'll get packed up and it'll never buff. It'll just streak the compound around and lose the buffing ability.
And that's pretty much all there is to using the dresser. You can turn the spurs against the rotation of the woolly hairs, or you can turn it with it. And I use it both directions. I run it with it and against it. And then when you go to put your compound on, you just want to put dots, little bitty dots around on it. In other words, you don't want to soak the pad down with your buffing compound to where it's really, really super wet, because it'll make it hard to buff. When you buff, you're buffing using compound, but you're also buffing it to a drier finish, and that's what causes the gloss. If you soak it down, yeah, you can cut quite a bit, but then you're going to get to where it starts streaking. So just use a few dots.
See, that's just about too much right there. I squeeze a little bit too hard. I'll take the compound, turn it around. The reason I do this is so it doesn't sling all the way off. Like I said, I put too much on there in that one spot, but not too much. I'll spread it around. See how I'm buffing towards, I'm going to go down to oil. And what I'll do, before I put any more compound on it, is I run the dresser over it. So, smear it around a little bit. I'm finding the hood to be too close to the vehicle, so you can take a block. Set it a little bit higher, that way you get a little bit more on the edge. So I'm hitting this chrome. And I can see that it's clear when we shot it. Apparently there's something wrong. It's got this little white specks all in it. Like I said, it was shot outside. I noticed, I thought I saw little white specks when I was wet sanding it. But, I mean, the point they're wanting is, you know, have a shine. So I guess that's what we're going to get, the shine out of it. Because I had sanded a run out of it. But it's actually got little white specks all in the clear. I mean, I can see them all across through there. Said take your dresser. Clean your woolly pad up before you put your next amount of compound on it. Just put dabs like that on it. Spread it around. Just a little bit. I usually throw the electrical cord over my shoulder so I don't get into the paint. When you're using the sponge buffer, even though the way this sponge is made, it may be tempting to hold the surface of the sponge flat against the surface of whatever you're buffing. But you can't really do that. Your buffer is going to go all over the place and you're going to have to fight it. You want, with it turning this way, if you're looking at it, turning that way, but you're going to want to keep pressure here. That makes sense? So you're only catching half the sponge, basically, maybe just a little less than half the sponge, and that's what you want to do when you're buffing. Same with the woolly buffer. You don't put it down flat against it and hold it and manhandle it. You almost let gravity do its work. You have just locked in full control to keep the thing from jumping around and bouncing and stuff like that. Now we're going to sponge buff, and of course I've used this a bunch of times, and like I said, usually for every job I do I buy new sponges, but this one's still pretty good. And this is what the 3M number 2 bottle would go with, the stuff would go on. But an interesting question has been brought to me: how do you center up the sponge pad? Because I mean, obviously there's no way, but you got a hole here. They sell a little plastic dowel that goes in here. Stick it in, lines it up, and centers it. And that's all there is to it. Now some of these pads do not have a hole, and you just have to do your best to get it centered. Sometimes they wrap around the backing pad, and that helps center it. But I've had some that are a little bit larger, by about ½ an inch. So you just have to guess. But if it's got a hole, be sure to ask your paint store. I'll look and see if I can find one of these that I can put down in the description. But that's how you center a pad. And the same principle applies to the woolly buffer. You don't sit there and just coat this thing down like there's no tomorrow. You just put your dabs on it. And this is a mid grade type compound. It's about mid-level basically. That's why it's 1, 2, 3. This is going to remove all the woolly hair buffer swirls. Or even if you sponged it, it's still, that rougher compound still leaves swirls. Basically what you're doing is you're just stepping up. You get rid of one swirl to the next swirl till there is no swirls. So that's what we're going to do here. Same principle applies to the same, the direction you've got your, with the woolly hair buffer, you always want to turn your direction over the edge so it doesn't grab or eat the edge off. with sponging, you'll notice the compound goes a lot longer because it stretches out further than it does with the woolly hair buffer. And usually for the mid-grade, I go for this thing wide open, a little bit faster speed. When I get down to the perfected, I go to slower speed. Same thing, I'll smear it around a little bit, keep her slinging everywhere. About the same as when sanding, I just kind of work in general areas and lap over until I cover the entire thing. Also, you don't push down, and you also don't hold it up real light. You just kind of just get it to almost a gravity, like that, and then you angle it. You just keep control of the gravity feel. Same with the woolly buffer. And now it's buffed out. Sadly, because of the improper setup to painting this hood, it's got white specks all in the clear. And it's in the clear, not in the base coat. I know because where I sanded that run out, where the clear was the heaviest, it left a line. But you can now see that after I've sanded and buffed it, it's got outside the fact that the paint job sucks, it was doomed from the start. But you can see that it's got a good reflection in it. You can see the clouds real well. And you can see my chimney in it real well. But if you look real close, if I can get the angle correctly, and I'll just move around because I can't really tell if it is picking up or not. It still has the orange peel in it that it was there. Of course, not as bad. It's actually smoothed out really well. Almost looks like a factory orange peel. And as I pointed out, there's all these little white spots all in the clear. And it's not white dust that got into the base coat. It's actually in the clear itself. Because where I showed that run, you can just see tons of little white bubbles or like little white spots all in it. And what that's from is where, like I said, I'll reference that other video down in the description. But this is where the hood was painted in too hot of temperature. The hood was sitting outside. It was about 95, 98 degrees that day, and on top of that, the hood had been sitting out in the sun, so that hood was probably anywhere from 100, 110 degrees. So what happened, and the reason why all those little I call them bubbles because that's really technically what they are, but all those little dots, what they are, is where the actual urethane clear, not the activating mix, not when you. Because clear is usually 4-to-1, depending on what kind of clear you get, but this was a 4-to-1 clear, 4 parts urethane clear to 1 part activator. This is where the activator, which has got a little bit of solvents in it and stuff too, this is where the actual urethane clear hardened and created a barrier. This is where the urethane clear dried and hardened on the outer surface of it, creating a barrier, keeping the activation is still occurring, and the activator and solvents still were not cured yet. But with that top layer creating a barrier, the vapors couldn't escape, so it creates bubbles. So I thought I'd seen them in it, but it was so orange peely I couldn't really tell. But once I sanded them, they showed up. And So basically it's ruined. I mean, the only fix is to repaint it. But like I said, this vehicle is an everyday driver, and it's going to get a complete overall paint job to it. So this is to get them by. It's nice, glossy. Most people aren't going to just come up and know, hey, what are those white bubbles? But the thing of it is, for me, I'm a perfectionist. It's trash, but it'll do. But that's what happens if you paint a panel or a whole car or whatever out in the sun with it that hot. It's going to do that, especially a base coat, clear coat. But your best bet is, if you're going to paint, and I actually have an ebook, and I'll put that down, how to get that ebook down in the description. There's an ebook on how you can paint cars outside when the best time of day is, and so forth. But this isn't the reason why you don't shoot a panel out in the sun, extremely hot weather. You want your conditions right in order to be able to paint anything, a panel, car, motorcycle, whatever you're painting. So you've seen how I color, sand, and how I buff. And I hope that helps you. I hope that answers some questions that people have been sending in to me as well. If not, be sure to leave me a comment or contact me through my site. And I take pictures and stuff through there. That way, if you're trying to show me what you're trying to do, I can help you a little bit better. But if you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and stick around for the next one, because I'm always working on something crazy. See you in the next one.